So welcome to Watercolours with Caroline, week 3 in the Masterwork series. This week we're going to do a Paul Gauguin painting. It's his first impression of the Tahitian landscape when he went to Tahiti to paint, where he lived for a few years at the end of his life, his quite short life. I think he was 53 or 54 when he died. This is a lovely colourful painting, a time to use orange and your bright colours. So get your paints ready, get your drawing and your paper ready, and let's paint.
So this is the one I did Wednesday. This is a poster. So this is one of the main posters for sale, and they really pinked all this area up and fixed the colors. They've tidied this part up, which was very messy in his original. Now I think, as far as I know, I think this was a photo of his original. It was hard to find a photo of his original, but you can kind of see his mountains were much more brown. His paintwork over here was very patchy, kind of patchy colors. And I believe it was a very quick painting. Just, you know, he sort of shoved this little black dog. I'm sure it's a dog. It's got a dog's tail, but it has a goat's head. So I think it was just like a little stick animal. It was maybe running across the field and he just stuck that in. So we can be pretty loose today and quite free, because he obviously was. And I love that it was just capturing his impression of this landscape when he first got to Tahiti, the heat of the colors of the rock and the countryside. So really beautiful. I did a few little color swatches here. So there's all kinds of colors you can use for these sort of burnt oranges. This one was burnt sienna, cadmium red, and azo yellow. So that made a sort of a warm brown. This was cadmium orange and burnt sienna, and lovely sort of burnt orange color. This is burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and quin rose. Now, if you wanted this, where's my pinker one? This pinker landscape, like the poster, you could add Quinacridone Rose in. Somebody did on Wednesday. It looked rather beautiful. And then I've got some darker browns here. We'll look at those. And I also tried the different clouds to kind of get the effect he had. This was just on dry paper, which we're going to do today. This was on wet paper. It made it soft and watercolory. Now, if you want a soft watercolory effect for the sky, you could wet your paper first. This was Kleenex, getting some of the clouds out with Kleenex. And this was a combination, sort of putting it on dry and then wetting some edges. I kind of just liked the dry edge for it just to be very different. His are very, you know, his white clouds would be put on afterwards. Probably he painted the sky and the clouds all in one. So I kind of like that hard edge, but it's totally up to you. If you want a softer cloud look, just wet your paper first. And of course, the different prints online had different color skies. This was the print you can buy that's been enhanced. The sky is much softer on this one. This was, I think, the original painting. It seemed a lot darker. And I went with an even bolder, darker sky with mine. I just kind of liked it being, yeah, just more color, I guess, just more color. So it's totally up to you how soft or bright you go. Now let's get started. I'm going to work on dry paper for mine. I'll just zoom in a little bit, move my paper so we can see the sky. And I am going to use Cobalt Blue and a little bit of Phthalo Blue, because I want a nice strong blue, but I don't want it to be too strong. Phthalo's very strong. Now remember, let's put the paper towel there. So let's look. I've got my Cobalt, which is a lovely soft blue. And if you just wanted to go with a softer sky, not too dark or bright, just stick with Cobalt if you prefer softer. But I wanted to go a little bit bold with this one, so I got a little bit of Phthalo Blue and mixed it with the Cobalt just to strengthen it up a little bit. so that it has that heat from the tropical sky, which is just much brighter than we would see in our sky here, where there's the reason ours is not as hot is because of the moisture in the air. And the moisture in the air keeps our skies soft at all times, unless it's one of those very, very hot, dry summers. So let's get back to our paper. And because I am right-handed, I'm going to start over on the left so I don't smudge anything. And I'm going to add a little bit more water to my wash. I'm going to grab a piece of paper to just test. I want to test my color before I start. I want it to be quite liquid because I've got a bit of work to do quite fast on dry paper. So I don't want it to be too dry. I want my...
And what size brush are you going to use?
I mixed with a size 10. I would probably usually do a size 8, but now I've mixed with my size 10, it's loaded with paint. So I don't want to, I never like to waste paint. So it's got paint on it. I'm going to just have to be very careful with it. It's good to use a 10 or an 8 because you're working on dry paper and you need to get that paint on pretty fast. So let me demonstrate something. So this is a size 4. And if I was working with a size 4 brush, it would be too small. It would be easy to get around the clouds with a small size 4, but it would take me ages. So my paint would dry as I was painting, and then I'd get lots of little streaks. Now I've got a much bigger brush, so I can actually really get that paint on quickly without streaks, but I just have to be a little bit careful as I go around the edges of the clouds and the edges of the trees. I can be careful by laying my brush sideways for the bigger strokes when I want to get more paint on. And then when I want more careful strokes, I can lift my brush up more and use just the tip to get around little edges on the clouds. So I'm coming here. And then I want to add more paint, so I'm going to push my brush down more. Now, as I get close to these palm trees, I don't want to paint over them. I want them to be a nice bright green with no blue underneath. So I'm going to lift my brush up, so just the point of the brush is putting paint down, and paint carefully around those palm fronds, maybe into them a little bit, and all the time picking up more paint. Can you see how wet and shiny this paint is? And as long as I keep picking up paint and keeping that wet and shiny, I'm not going to have any streaks or any trouble getting my paint to go across the paper in one go. But I have to make sure that I keep picking up wet paint, and that's where a bigger brush is very helpful. I'm getting close to the mountain, so again I'm going to lift the brush up and just use the tip. And then as I come down the mountain where I've got more sky to fill in, I can push my brush down and have it on its side more to get more paint off of the brush. And every time you see a little pause, I'm picking up a little bit more paint. And now there's a palm tree here. Now I could paint these palm trees with the blue, but it would be very difficult to get a green to go over the top that would show up. You'd have to go pretty dark, and I want the green to show up. And I'm painting around this tree. And I think this end of the painting is where they probably cut the edge off. It was probably very ragged with pinholes in. And because the trees seem to stop abruptly at the edge of this painting. Now all the rest there is mountains, but I have a little bit more sky to do over here, but I wanted to get over that full part with no stops and no brush strokes. And then I can load my brush again and paint the underside of the cloud. Again, I've got a big area here, so I can use the big, what's called belly of the brush, push it down and get that on quickly. Pick the brush up to the point and get around these mountains. And every time I stop a brush stroke, I make sure I stop with good amount of paint on the brush. If you if you keep painting until your brush runs out of paint and then stop, you're going to have a dry edge. You'll be stopping on a dry edge, and that will give you a brush stroke or a line where you stop your brush stroke. And I'm kind of almost making the palm fronds as I paint. And his were very loose, so you don't have to be too precise. I'm coming up here. I did notice he didn't even, I don't think, have the right amount of tree trunks to go with the amount of trees that he painted. He sort of just slapped them in. I think it was a very, very quick outdoor painting. And I'm going from my painting instead of his original. Should get his original here. He actually has, some, I've missed a little bit of blue sky here coming down under these trees. That's why I grabbed his. I do have that there, but sometimes it's easier to actually look at the original than the one I have that I painted in front of me. I'm bringing that down there. Then he's got a big white cloud behind the mountain. Now this is a first for me, painting a sky on dry paper with dry edges to the clouds, but you know what, I just kind of like it in this style of painting. So there we go. Sky finished. The number 10 brush was great. It did good service. And I think I've been observing people using brushes over the last few weeks, and it's using your brush correctly that is half the key to getting everything working right. Like that, lifting the brush and then laying it down, pushing it when you want lots of paint, getting lots of paint all the time on your brush, not trying to work with a dry brush, unless you want a dry brush. Look, I'll let you catch up with that bit. And we don't need to use the hairdryer because we're going to work on the foreground. I'm just going to push my camera back a little bit. Yeah, well, while the sky is just soaking in, and when you're ready, we're going to work on the foreground here, which is not touching the sky in any way. When you've done your sky, just remember, don't go back over your brush strokes. That's a great way to get streaks in your sky. But although, I mean, looking at his, if you look closely, I think he diluted his oil paint with quite a lot of turpentine to do this very fast, and quite a lot of streaks in his paintwork. So he kind of painted his oil on, I think, like using watercolor, by diluting his oil paints down with the turpentine. So it was quite runny to get the washes on very quickly. And you can kind of see that streakiness that he has. And again, this is the print. And this is, I think, a photograph of his original, but even the photographs get enhanced. And this one was a bit blurry. But we'll keep it impressionistic and we don't have to worry too much. Now we're going to have to mix some colors for the foreground because we need to work on all of it at once, wet and wet. We're going to mix a pinky sandy color for the paths. We're going to mix some light greens and darker greens for the meadows here, and put it all on at once, sort of with the colors. They can blend into each other. This is I don't like my first one very much, but it's kind of growing on me. So my first one, I had a lot of wet and wet going on, and then some upward strokes for the sort of grass here. My second one, I was a bit more flat with the second one, not as much wet and wet. So, and I actually even missed there is a path where the dog is back there, which I did do on the first one and missed out on my second one. There's a little bit of a path along here, and then these lovely curved paths. I think this must be wheel tracks from maybe a wagon or something. Anyway, let's mix up some color. Put my samples over there. And I'm not going to put paper towel over my sky because I don't want to blotch it, but let's first of all, we need some raw sienna or some yellow ochre, whichever one you have. And again, I'm going to use my number 10 brush because doing wet in wet, pull back a bit. You don't want to have a tiny little brush for wet in wet. It's going to hamper you. So raw sienna first. That's going to be our earth color. And we just want that by itself. For the path, I'm going to mix the raw sienna with a little bit of Quinacridone Rose, just to have that warm color of the path. Later, you can always add a little bit of burnt sienna to that if you want to, or even now. It just depends. The colors of these earths are the iron oxide in the earth, and iron oxide is used to make all of the siennas, all of the burnt siennas, raw siennas, iron oxide earth colors. It's made from earth that has oxidized and has the iron in it. So I'm just adding a little bit more raw sienna, a bit more Quinacridone Rose, so it makes it very red, that kind of earth, or orange. We've got those two colors, that's base colors. Now I want to make that bright green for the grass, and that means you're going to have mostly bright yellow. So let's move this over. I tend to use my Azo Yellow, but I have also found that Indian Yellow is a beautiful one for that. This is the Daniel Smith Indian Yellow, beautifully bright. So that's a lovely color too for making bright green. We want lots of yellow for a bright green, and then a tiny bit of phthalo green. Let's grab my green. And if you put too much phthalo green in, you'll have something that's too green. I just took a little tiny bit on the tip of my brush and made a very bright green. And you don't need much before your green gets too green. It needs to be mostly yellow. I'm going to mix a little bit of that phthalo with my Indian Yellow too. So it's just, the Indian Yellow is just a little bit stronger than the Azo Yellow. Both make a beautiful bright green. And then we want a slightly darker green. Not really dark, but just a little bit darker. So I'm going to do the same yellow and some phthalo green, so it all is in the same harmonious color family. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Cobalt Blue to that. So it's the same green, the yellow and the phthalo, and then a little bit of Cobalt Blue added to it. And then we've got a good variety of colors for that foreground grass. We want it warm and bright, and we don't want to go into the dark greens that we're going to have for the background trees and bushes and stuff. We want it really light. Now I'll let you mix up a little bit of paint. Put mine a little bit closer. I'm going to remove my protective paper. I zoom in a little bit. Yes. And I'm going to put down, this is the Quinacridone Rose with the raw sienna, and I'm not going to forget this path back here this time, because all of these lovely paths, in the way of great painters just throwing together a wonderful composition, they all lead your eye into this painting, these beautiful curves and these lines. And I'm going to do this path first, and then I'm going to do the other path last, just to see what's the difference going to be. And we're not to worry too much about paint that bleeds. They come around there, and then I'll leave the next one. So again, I'm going to start over here with my big brush now, and first take some just raw sienna, and I want to put the raw sienna on very loosely. I don't want to fuss with it. Then I want to go into my lovely bright green, the phthalo green with the yellow, and just allow that to mix with the raw sienna. And I'm painting up to the edge of that path that I put on. Now, when you work on dry paper, it's easier to control your paint. I'm not going to paint over that raw sienna that I put on there. I'm going to paint sort of up to the side of it. And paint right over the dog. He's going to be black and he'll be put in last. So I have the raw sienna just blending into the bright green. I can always get a little bit more raw sienna if I want to put it on. And now I'm going to get the darker green that I added some Cobalt Blue to that. I'm going to put that over here. Maybe just along there. That's all. So we got a little bit of dark green, the raw sienna, the light green, all mixing wet in wet. Don't disturb them too much and just let them do their thing. I'm going to mix up a little bit more raw sienna, so I've got plenty, because the middle path here is more, is a whole warmer color. And in fact, this is the raw sienna. I'm going to get a little bit of that pinky path color. I'm going to add that too. I've got a bit of green on my brush. I'm not worried about that. Paint around the little fisherman or the guy that's on the path. I got the raw sienna. I've got a bit of that rosy color. And I also want some of the light green. Put some of the light green on as well. I got all of those colors there. And you'll notice my green is blending into my pink path. Doesn't matter, I can go back later and I can put a little bit more pink or brown on that path. It just doesn't matter. Clean my brush up because I want to go back into the raw sienna and sort of here have some more of that raw sienna and then the pinky color. I might add a little bit of burnt sienna to that pinky color just here. And then I want to go into my light green, which I'm running out of, so I'll have to quickly mix a little bit more. A bit more yellow with that. And I need to get that nice bright green on before anything else dries. And I'm going to grab some raw sienna on my brush. Put that on there. Now I'm going to put some of the darker green on later with some upward brush strokes. But for now, I'm just going to put a little bit in the edge of the path and maybe the edge of the corners. And I can add some more dark green later when this is dry. Grab a bit more of my light green, my yellowy green, because this part here, very yellowy green. And then there's kind of a blacky brown piece and more. Adding a bit of the raw sienna and yellowy green back here. And now, because I said I'm going to do both methods, I'm going to put the pinky path in after I put the two greens in. It's got to get the right brush for that. I'm going to use my number 4 brush for that. And again, I've mixed a bit more raw sienna, Quinacridone Rose. And I'm going to pop the path in. It will bleed into the green. Second layer can put some sharper edges on that and some shadows. I don't want to leave it unpainted and then done afterwards. It will look sort of pasted on. I want it to blend in and have that watercolor look, and then I can put some more details on later. And even as this one here is drying, I could put a little bit more, but I think I'll leave it. I'll leave it till it's dry, and then I'll just add a little bit more color to the path when it's dry, a few shadows. I'm adding a little bit of dark green through here, shadows under the trees. And I think the important thing is to keep it as loose as you can. Don't get too hung up on making it neat and tidy. I'm going to put a little bit of the light green here. It's going to blend into the dark green shrubbery. Just putting an edge for it. I'll put the dark green over the top for that shrubbery back there. I've tried to find out what people think the guy was carrying. They think that the black bag on this side of the pole, what he's got is a long pole over his shoulders. Let's get the a clearer one here. So he has a long pole over his shoulders. This is his arm bent holding the pole. They're pretty sure this is a black canvas bag that is holding his tools or fishing gear. They're not sure, but they're pretty sure that that's it. And this could be fish or shellfish or something like that on this end of the pole, but nobody's really clear about what that would be. So we're going to do just the colors and shapes and go for it. I think in an island community like this that had mostly fish and shellfish diet, it would probably have been fish or shellfish. I don't know. Maybe if anybody knows better than that, let me know. But I did research it and try and find out, and nobody really knew that I could find. So, if you have oranges, this is a great time to think about using them. I never think about using them. I always mix them, and I don't know why. This bright one is my transparent orange. This is really, really bright. And this is my cadmium orange, which I don't use because it's very opaque. This is a burnt sienna orange, which I guess is sort of made with a burnt sienna and some red, which is rather pretty. I do think what we're going to work on next, we're going to work on all of these orange parts of the trees. We're going to work on these orangey dead, I think they're like dead palm fronds over here. And this very orangey tree over here. So we can use a variety of oranges for that. These trees that he has here look very much like cadmium orange. Pretty sure he may have used that. For some of these, I would use an orange mixed with a bit more burnt sienna maybe. This is the print, so this print looks very pink here. I don't see that in the other paint, the other one that I have, but maybe it was, who knows, the photography of those sorts of things is always a bit dodgy. This one looks a bit more pink in this one. So I think what we need is a range of oranges for all of these orangey parts. And then when we do the mountain behind, to make mine stand out, I just did mine a bit more brown so that everything stood out a bit more. But we're going to fill in all of these bright orangey parts. I think this one over here, this palm, really needs to be like a raw sienna with a tiny bit of orange. This can be more red and yellow sort of orange. And then for some of these, I would add some burnt sienna in. And that's what I had that, I had this whole list of different oranges that I made. I think my favorite was the burnt sienna, the cadmium red, and the azo yellow. That gives you a really nice bright one, or cadmium orange with burnt sienna gives you a nice bright one. But I know not all of you will have those colors because we hardly ever use them. But I'm going to mix up some oranges anyway. I have right here some rather dirty raw sienna, so I'm going to get rid of that. Well, not dirty, it's got a lot of green in it. I'm going to get rid of that for a minute. I can use the greens again. Let's get my number 8 brush. Let's get a bit more raw sienna here. And I can add a little bit of cadmium red or any kind of bright red to that, just to make it a kind of an earthy orange, if you know what I mean. Now here I have the raw sienna and Quinacridone Rose. I'm going to make some more of that. To make that kind of pinky orange color. And then I don't want to get rid of the green. That's going to be useful, so I use my other palette over here. And I'll start with some burnt sienna. That's always a good place to start. These darker colors. And I'll add some cadmium red to that. Brighten it up. And some yellow. That'll give me a nice earthy orange, because this is all iron oxidey earthy oranges that we're looking at. And for some of the trees, because I have cadmium orange, very old dusty looking cadmium orange, I'm going to use some for some of those brighter trees. They'll stand out. Then it's got a bit of blue in it. I'm trying not to get that in there. That's a nice bright cadmium orange. You can always mix an orange with yellow and red. Let's grab a bit of my Azo Yellow and a bit of Cadmium Red. And we've got another nice orange. So yellow and red, and add some raw siennas, some browns. Have a range. They're all going to be useful because we're going to use quite a bit of them. I think I put them all close enough I can reach them. And I'm going to be doing some small detail now. So I'm going to go into my number 4 brush for some of these smaller trees. And there's some little tiny trees in here. I might even go smaller. I think I'll go down to my number 2 brush because they are little tiny trees. I'm just going to use my cadmium orange for those. That's sort of what they look like. And get those in first. And again, if you don't have cadmium orange, just mix yellow and red until you get an orangey color, gamboge, and a little bit of red. Pop those in. And then these fronds here, I'm going to use the raw sienna that has a tiny bit of red in it just here. They're not quite as orange. And we have to put all these light and warm colors in first because we can't put them in after the dark colors. That just won't work. Oh. Still got my number 2 brush here because I want to get these little fronds in. And the fronds that are sticking up are bright green. And remember, when you put the color on, when it dries, it's going to be about 30% lighter. So, you know, don't feel you've got it too dark. It will dry lighter, and we are going to put dark colors behind it. So for some of these tree fronds up here, I want to use the mix that has a little bit of raw sienna in it and burnt sienna. And the tree trunk is quite light, so I find that putting in these light colors first helps you paint around them later when we have to do a little bit of negative painting around them. Just having the paint there helps you do that. Remember, he's a really, really loose. You don't have to be extremely detailed. Just that loose hanging look to the palm fronds. We're going to put in some dark brown later when we've got a lot of the other colors in. Now it doesn't matter what color these trunks are. We're going to do them first with like a raw sienna color. We can always add a bit of color later, but I just want them in there so I don't forget to paint around them, and I can find my way around them okay. And it doesn't matter, again, if you switch oranges and add a bit of pink. There's a lot of different colors in his, so I'm actually going to add a little bit of the pinky. This photo shows a bit more pinky color here. And certainly up there it's darker green, so put the darker green later. And grab a little bit more of that pinky color. And the ones up here are going to be darker brown. I'm going to put a little bit of color underneath, so when I go over the top of the dark brown, I have a little bit of the light color showing. Now these ones down here are a more raw sienna, sort of yellow ochre color. I do have yellow ochre here, so I'm going to just use, I didn't mix any up, but I'm just looking, and I think I'll just use a little bit here. Again, raw sienna is a great alternative. And these trunks are much browner, and I will put the brown in later. I'll start with the raw sienna or yellow ochre and come back and add the darker brown when we've got the mountain in. I'm being really, really loose with these. Don't need a lot of detail. And I'm going to water down my raw sienna so it's not too, by that I mean I've got a bit of raw sienna here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water so it's not so light to dark, rather, because just behind here it's much lighter, little hill. It's very raw sienna-ish. Just along there. I'm going to thicken that paint up now, make it a little bit thicker. So I had quite watery paint, make it a little bit thicker with my number 2 brush, because I want to paint the pole that the guy is carrying here on his shoulders, and his hat. I have some raw sienna, paint the pole and his hat. And his clothing is brown, so we'll put that on when this is all dry. And we'll put the bag and everything else on when that's all dry. And oh, there's one more orange tree over here. And if I get, I don't know where all my, there's several of these color pictures. This one shows quite a lot more kind of light color through the orange. This doesn't show as much. I kind of suspect he painted this big bright green tree first, and then I think he put the dark green tree over the top, and then a bit of the orange for this tree over the top of that. We don't have the luxury of oil paint, so what we'll do is I'm going to paint a little bit of raw sienna on that tree. Let's zoom in even more. And then I'm going to get the red and yellow orange that I mixed and paint that tree. Just let it blend into that raw sienna, wet and wet. Tip of my brush for bubbly brush strokes. And we can do the rest of the trunk and everything later with dark brown when that's all dry. Now I'm having a good look, trying to make sure I've put in all of the orangey areas. You'll see this tree is a bit more orange. Oops. There is a little tree over here that I'm going to leave quite white for the moment, because I think he splodged white paint on to make that tree. Has like a violet tree trunk, a little bit of blue and violet on it. So I'm just going to leave that white for now. And after we've got all of this raw sienna and orange on, we're going to paint the background mountains. We can start with this lighter one, and then we can do the darker one behind it. Oh, it's very different. This print is very pinky. This photograph is very brown. So I kind of went right in the middle with this one and had it way more flat than his. Just a more reddish brown and not quite so dark. So totally up to you what you use, whether you want to go more pink or more orange or more brown. I have quite a lot of paint here ready. I'm gonna look at this one. This is my raw sienna and Quinacridone Rose, and I'm going to add burnt sienna to that. And rose. I'm going to go with the rosy look, I think. And where's my test paper? There it is. Test out that color. I think I want a bit more rose with that color. I think I'm going to go with the rosy look this time. because I've got one that's brown, one that's orange, and now I'm going to go for the more rosy look. I've got a bit more Quinacridone Rose with that. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. I'm going to add my Azo Yellow to that. A bit more rose. I'm testing it out. And then a little bit more burnt sienna. I don't want it too. Okay, right. So to go over that again, I had raw sienna and rose and burnt sienna. And I added a bit of yellow and then a bit more rose and then a bit more burnt sienna. And I am going to go with a more rosy one for this painting. If you don't want it so rosy, don't add as much rose, or maybe add a little bit more burnt sienna or a bit of red. I have a few mixes written down in my notes. I've got burnt sienna, Quinacridone Rose, and Azo Yellow. So that's sort of what I used. I added a bit of raw sienna with that too. And then Quinacridone Rose and Yellow Ochre for the lighter parts of the mountain. It's fairly similar to what I've got. I'm just going a bit more rose with this one. This is my raw sienna, so I've got that color on my brush that I just mixed, and I'm going to mix some water with that and a bit more raw sienna, and that's a bit more watery, not quite as dark. Pop that over there. And the reason I just made a slightly more watery one is this side of that mountain is much lighter. So here you can see on his it's lighter. So we're going to start with that lighter, more watery color, and then go to the darker mix. I do have to get behind all these tree trunks here, so I am going to go with my number 4 brush to get into those tree trunks, and I'm going to use that lighter, more watery mix. Raw sienna, the rose, a little bit of burnt sienna, and start with that one. Now I've moved all of my pictures out the way. So I'm painting the foreground mountain first, starting over here with my lighter mix behind these trees. And I have to get in behind them carefully, so I'm using my smaller brush. Doesn't matter, whatever small brush you're comfortable with, going in behind these trees. And when this is all dry, you can put a little bit of dark brown on the tree trunks to just make them stand out. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of the rosier color, the darker color on my brush. Now I didn't wash my brush, not washing it between colors, and I've gone over that tree trunk. Doesn't matter, I'm going to come back with some dark brown and define it, but I can still see it. Picking up the darker color. Go carefully around the green tree. Pick up a bit more color. I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna to it now. Just grab a little bit of burnt sienna. Now, I was going to switch brushes, but I'm going to stick with my number 4 brush right now. It's doing an okay job, but I do need to keep reloading it with paint so that I don't get streaks and I don't run out of paint. Because working with a smaller brush, you're not going to get as much paint on the brush. And go carefully around those trees. It looks kind of bright, but like I said, it will dry lighter and it has to soak in yet. It's still wet. And grab a bit more. And Go this side. And taking the point of my brush into those tree fronds that come out, so I can make the tree shape with the point of my brush. That's why it's sometimes easier in a small space like this to use a smaller brush. And you may have bigger paper than me. I went with the, I think 6x8 this time, just to save paper, because I go through a lot of paper. But if you're doing the 8x10, you might need a slightly bigger brush. Right, I'm just might adjust my light. My light has a daylight adjustment on it. I'm just trying to get it so it's accurate for the color I'm using. It's not accurate enough. A bit of warmth in it. Trying to see where that comes down to. Comes down here. And of course we're using negative painting to go around a lot of these shapes so that we get nice, clean, clear colours. The great exercise in negative painting and using your brush. Well, still that light is not accurate for the colours I'm using. You see how I've got the warmth. Yeah, I think that's a bit more, really tricky to adjust it just perfectly. Right, I just have a little bit to go on this side here. And this pinky orangey colour is going to look beautiful against the bright green tree we'll be putting there when it's dry. And when you have that colour, if you wanted to, if you find that this tree has dried quite light, I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow on the bottom of that tree. I think, do you know what's happened, why the light is different? Because the sun has gone around from my window completely, and the sunlight and daylight in here has really changed. But this is really showing it a different color to what I'm seeing here on my table. Now we can't paint the mountain behind that while this is still wet. So we're going to have to work on something else on the painting while that dries. Otherwise, when we put the mountain behind it, it will all flood in together and we'll have all one color. So we need to make sure that this is dry before we do that. But we can move on to some of these other areas on the painting. The little parts in the middle, the lavender and the blue and so forth. The brown on the little man. Some of the foreground. There's all kinds of things we can work on while that one dries. The part we'll be doing next, just so you know where we're going, will be these blues and violets in the middle here, which are much more blue and violet in this print here. And they really look pretty in the middle of this composition. In this print, the guy's clothing seems very pinky brown, pinky orange. And in this print, they have him looking very brown. Now, I think we need to make him much more brown because we have so much pinky orange that he's just going to get lost if we don't I used more brown for his clothing. So we can work on those things next. We're going to work on putting in the blues and the violets and the flowers, a little bit of blue and violet on the tree over here, and the man's brown clothing. We need to be careful of this light green tree. We have to make sure that all of this orangey brown that you put in here is dry before we do that. So we work on everywhere that's dry. I'm just trying to avoid having to use the hairdryer all the time so we can work on the dry parts. So I think the next area is this area here. And for the blue, let's put the blue in first. You can use Cerulean Blue for that, or you can use Cobalt Blue with a little bit of phthalo, like the sky color. I think I'm going to use Cerulean. And then you can mix with the Cerulean a little bit of Quinacridone Rose rather, to get the pretty rosy lilac color next to it. And then we can mix the Cobalt with the Quinacridone Rose to get some of these other colors here. And this little tree, it can have a little bit of cobalt shadow on it, a little bit of violet shadow. We don't have to worry too much about that. That can have a little bit on now and then a little bit later. We just have to remember to paint around it when we put the dark mountain in the background. I'm looking at this sort of blob here. I don't quite know what it is, just bushes, I guess, but it looks like it's got some of the orange in it and then some brown. So remember, it's a very impressionistic, modernistic painting, so we don't have to be super fussy about everything. But I want to start with the blue. That splash of blue in here is so pretty. I want a little brush. I'm going to stick with my number 2 brush, if I can find it. There it is. And a little bit of cerulean, I think. Cerulean is a coolish blue and very similar to the sky color. We mix the sky color with cobalt and phthalo blue, and some manufacturers use phthalo blue and white to make their cerulean. So a little bit of cerulean, and I'm going to put those blue bushes in here. They're kind of behind the orange trees, so that is a lovely complement to those orange trees. It's quite light. He would have mixed his with white paint, of course, as you can when you're oil painting. I'm going to leave the little tree trunk white because he's painted a white tree trunk on that tree. There's sort of a little bit here. I can't get all mine exactly where he has his, and I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to get it where it works with my painting. As I don't have as much space. Right, now I've got that cerulean blue in there, lovely bright blue. I have cerulean blue on that little paintbrush. So while I have it there, I'm just going to put a few little shadows on that little tree over here, just while I have it on my paintbrush. Now, I still have some cerulean blue on the palette, and I'm going to add a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to it to make the violet. I'm just going back and forth with rose and blue. It's quite a rosy violet next to the blue that I just put on. I have a kind of a rosy violet. Not worrying at all that that blue is wet, because literally there's a blurred line between the blue and the violet there. So I'm going to just put that in wet and wet and not worry if they run into each other. That's fine. Do I want a little bit more rose in with mine? Yeah, I think so. I think I'm going to add a little bit more rose to the mix, just to pink it up a little bit. You can add and subtract color halfway through painting wet and wet. You don't have to stick with the same mix. If you think, oh, I just want to vary that color a little bit, and just add a bit more paint of one or other color. And then painting up to that green tree that's going to be there. And also now I have that pinky violet color on my brush. I'm going to add a little bit of that to this tree over here too. A tiny bit. And then the bushes in front, maybe they may be light lavenders or something. I want to make that lilac softer and pinker, so I'm going to go with what I got and add a bit of cobalt blue to that and a bit of water, and then cobalt blue will soften it up a lot, and then some Quinacridone Rose, make it really pinky, and then more water. Want to lighten that up quite a bit, more water. And then starting over at this side, I want more pink in it. Grab some more pink. Just got my number 2 brush now, and very diluted paint because I want this to be lighter. So I'm diluting my paint, adding a little bit more pink, diluting. And popping in the lavender or whatever is over here. And what's making mine light is water in with the mix. I've added a little bit more rose into the mix. I'm just going to switch it to a more rosy color. Coming across. He has, in his I can see vertical brush strokes. So just lots and lots of vertical brush strokes. I'm getting a bit darker paint on my brush. A little bit more blue. A little bit more blue in with the mix. Coming across. I have to be careful as I get up to this paint here. I have to just touch it and make sure that it's fairly dry, which it is fairly dry, before I come over to this paint over here. And all of this light green that's underneath this is going to be dark green with just a little bit of light green showing through. Add a little bit more. Just looking at his 2 different variations of that. I think I still want to stick with mostly a rosy violet. Just added a little bit more rose, because the rose will look lovely against the green. Now, as we come under the tree in this one, it kind of goes a bit brown. As we come under the tree in this poster, it stays kind of pink. I think I'm just going to keep going with the pinky violet that I have here. Be careful going around his hat. Maybe add a little bit more Quinacridone Rose to my palette, as I think I'm going to love the rose against the green tree. Now you may wonder why there's a space between the pole and his hat. We're going to put a little bit of neck in there with the dark brown, so don't worry about that. That sort of comes out the end there, and I've gone very different to my other one, which had a lot of brown in it there. I've gone with the more rosy color. Now I'm charging in color. I've gone back to that wet paint, and I'm just charging in a little bit of the more rosy color into that wet paint. Give it a bit more color. And of course I am going to do the darker green in front. We've got the blue, we've got the violet, the rosy colors. I'm going to not worry about that sort of brown blotch there. Behind it is some very, very subtle bluey lilac colors. So I'm going to go back to the cerulean, add a little bit of my violet. So here's what I'm doing. Grabbed a little bit of cerulean, tiny bit. I'm going to grab a little bit of my violet, mix it with the cerulean, so I get a sort of a very soft, watery, violety gray blue. And I'm just putting it in this area back here. What he has back here is just a lot of blotches of paint in like greens and beiges and white. So I want to put a little bit of lilac in here, around here. Remember, we're going to come in with some dark green. And I'm going to grab a little bit of raw sienna. I don't care if it's mixes wet and wet. Grab a little bit of raw sienna and just pop that in here. And then that's going to be that kind of all splodginess that he has back here. I do notice that he has an orange, I think an orange tree back there too that I didn't notice. But I don't think I'm going to worry about it. We're just going to have Orange Mountain back here. I'm not going to worry about that orange tree at all. I'm thinking it's just here. And here. It was very difficult to see in this one. I'm just going to put Orange Mountain back there. It'll be fine. And all the while we're doing that, the orangey mountain is drying. I think if we do the guy's clothes next, and possibly that bright green tree, you're going to make sure that this mountain's dry. I think it's going to be all dry enough to then do the darker mountain behind. I'm going to mix a brown for his clothing. Find some space on here. I know. Let's go over here. I've got some browny orangey paint. Can use that. That's all right. Some burnt sienna with that. And how do you make brown? You mix blue with it. I'm going to take some Cobalt Blue. Mix that with it. And a little bit of raw sienna maybe. Because we don't want a super dark brown. It's just that kind of a That would be close to a raw umber, I think, if you had a raw umber. If you just, I mean, you can use a brown paint. If you have raw umber or something, you can use that. I mixed a bit of water with that, but that is a good enough color for his clothing. Again, I want a tiny brush. I go with my number 1 brush because my painting's kind of small. Get a little bit of that color I've just mixed, which is like a raw umber. Basically cobalt blue with raw sienna and burnt sienna should do it. We can put detail on his clothing with a little bit of the black paint. I'm going to put his little jacket on there. His arm carrying the pole. And I'm going to suck a little bit of that paint up with my brush. That's not too dark. I'll add a little bit of raw sienna to that. Just lighten it up a little bit. And then his legs. This is like those little people we painted, very sort of, kind of like little stick people. We've got the one leg straight, it's the leg sort of behind, and then he's stepping forward with the bent leg here. Gauguin has not really painted much detail in this, just like our little stick figures we did. And then we're going to put a little bit of extra detail on with the sort of black paint. He's carrying something orangey, so I've got lots of orangey paint here. And again, we're going to put some detail on this with some black or a dark mix that we're going to make. And whatever he's carrying here is kind of an orangey color. And pop that on. Now I'm going to dab a tiny bit of orange onto the wet paint of his clothing. And when we have the darker paint, we're going to put in the neck and the band on the hat too. And of course the black bag that's on the pole. Don't need too much detail. The tree trunk over here, I'm going to mix a little bit more cobalt blue with my violet. I've got my number 1 brush, nice thin brush, and Gauguin has put a very dark blue violet tree trunk in this tree over here, and he has a couple of, let's just look at his instead of mine. Always a good idea to go to the source. So he has a little branch out here. It's more crooked than mine. He made his more crooked, and a couple of branches up there. I'm just putting that in. Get mine crooked enough. And my paths are kind of a bit washed out now. I want to put a bit more color on my path. So I'm going to get my mix, that was my raw sienna and rose mix, add a little bit of burnt sienna. And I want to darken up my path a little bit. That's what I meant. We can put more detail on later on any of these things. So I'm putting on that darker color. On the edge of my path. And of course I want to wash that in with my wet brush so that it's not too distinct. And a little bit more burnt sienna to that. Bit of water. Just wash that in a little bit more here. And I want to make the other one have a bit more colour. Again, put the colour on, wet brush. Let's wash that in a little bit. A bit more here. Just got a little bit more colour on that path. If you don't want it as pink or as orangey, you can use more burnt sienna. And now that shows up a little better. There is a kind of a clumpy green rock there too that I didn't do in the first wash because it wouldn't have made a rock. But there's sort of a rock here, a mound of grass or something here. Pop that in. Now I know you may not be caught up to me quite, but just looking at the time, I've got to make sure I actually get finished. I will be also doing some sort of dry brush and wet in wet grass to make a bit more texture in the front, and you don't have to do that, but you can see a little bit of texture in his brush strokes there. This one is a bit more obvious. That looks like sort of grass growing. So you can do that with a dry brush or a brush with some water. I'll show you what I mean. Just going to, I'm grabbing the greens that I used to start with, which was the yellow and the Phthalo Green, and then the Cobalt Blue. Make a darker green. And then I want to use it, I'm going to use a dry brush. Means I've got quite a big brush, my 10, and I want to get a bit of that paint off of there, and then I want to scrape that brush upwards onto the dry paper to get that sort of dry brush look. A little bit more green here maybe. So what I'm trying to emulate is his quick brush strokes in oil. And when I got a few of those brush strokes on, if they're not blending well, I can take a wet brush and I can do a little bit of wet brush to sort of blend them in if I feel that they're not blended in enough. And onto that wet that I've just put there, I can put a little bit more paint. I'm going to get a little bit of the sandy colour, because there is a bit of the sandy colour in there. And into that wet, I can add a little bit of wet in wet as well. So dry brush, wet in wet, a little bit of texture, a little bit more colour, a bit more texture. I'm getting that sandy colour again, adding a little bit more to that. So it's a mixture, dry brush, a little bit of water, and a little bit of wet in wet. A little bit of shadow back here. And it doesn't matter if you have that whole combination, because watercolor is all about having that wet and dry and puddling, and we cannot do an oil painting, so we have to make it a watercolor, give it the watercolor properties. And don't do too much. Like if you do too much, you're going to kind of lose the spontaneity of it. I've got very dry brush now, and I'm just going to put a little bit more dark green texture over here. And a very dry brush with some sandy red color, which I'm going to flatten my brush down and sort of scrape onto this path here. So I've got a towel beside me that I can take some of the paint off my brush and just scrape it on. So I know I'm going a little bit fast now, but I'm aware we've got sort of 15 minutes, so we want to get the finishing touches on. I'll let you do that. And while you're working on that, I'm going to use my very light green that I used for the foreground, and I'm going to put that very light green tree in. That's just the yellow and the phthalo green. I might add a little bit of raw sienna just to make it a little bit more muted. That's the word. So yellow, raw sienna, a little bit of phthalo green. And I'm going to put that great big tree in. Now I'm going to go over where the dark green tree will be too, because we can put the dark green over the top of that when it's dry. No problem with that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to mix up my orangey brown for my background. And I'll tell you what colors I've got in a minute. And I'm going to use a lot of what I got on my palette anyway. Making good use of my burnt sienna. And like I said, I think I'm going to go more rosy with this one. Kind of like the second print. Test out my colors. Oh yeah, that's a nice rosy brown. Beautiful. My orange is a bit pale. See if we can get it a little bit more orange. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, okay. Right. Now I'm going to go in, we've got 10 minutes, so I've really got to go in and try and get the background mounted in. So I have got a brighter orange for the left-hand part. I've got Azo Yellow, Cadmium Red, and Burnt Sienna in here for a nice sort of burnt orange. And then in this one, I have Burnt Sienna, Quinacridone Rose, and Ultramarine Blue to make a dark rosy brown, which I didn't use in my first two. I'm going more rosy with this one, just having a bit of fun changing the colors up. So I'm going to start over on the left with the more orangey colors, and then as I get towards the top of the mountain, I'm going to switch to the darker brown. And I've got to get that in so that we can get finished. And if you don't get finished in the time, then at least it will be there for you to watch, and for everybody else that doesn't make it to the Zoom. Right, I'm going to grab my number 6 brush and start over on the left with the orangey, very orangey color. Load up my brush. And this is more, I think this is more orangey than my other one. So and the one thing I have to be careful of here is this little tree. I've got to paint around that carefully. And I go a little bit quiet when I'm, well, letting you paint too, but when I'm going around something this intricate, I do stop talking because I need all of my concentration to do that. And of course I got to remember to go around these trees too. And there's going to be some dark green at the end. This looks like such a simple little painting, doesn't it? You know, splash on a bit of this and a bit of that, quite flat color, but there's a lot to it. And even though some of these impressionists and painters didn't do much detail, their compositions were really interesting and well thought out and well planned, and there was a lot more to their paintings than you think at first glance. Again, I want to keep these tree trunks kind of light. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of my, what I do when I pick up a little bit of the darker paint is don't wash my brush, and I get a little bit of that dark paint on my brush, and then I'm mixing it first of all into my lighter paint so that I have a more even transition. I don't want to just go light then dark, but I want to have it a little bit darker, especially behind these light orange trees. And coming down to that blue. The light orange trees will stand out more if I go darker at this point, but not too dark, not like the top of the mountain dark, which is going to be much darker. So slowly working my way into the dark around these trees, picking up a little bit more dark now. No washing your brush. Don't wash your brush. That way you use what light paint is on your brush, and then you're slowly adding the dark paint. Now I'm going right into the dark paint now. Loading my brush with it. And back into the dark paint, loading my brush because I want it to be nice and strong coming up to this peak. Load my brush. That dark paint, if I have any left, is going to be really useful to make the blacks, which would have been dark brown. The Impressionists, Post-Impressionists, Modernists, they almost never used black. They would mix a nice dark colour with blues and browns and violets. They're coming down here. I'm going to kind of outline the top of that mountain. Let's make sure that's all filled in, dark. Add a little charge in a little bit more dark there, and that's all good. And I'm looking at the tree. This tree trunk has a little bit of dark edge to it. I'm going to put that in. I've got dark on my brush. I'm going to make good use of it. This tree trunk here. Some branches. Tree trunk. These ones here. I'm going to use what's on my brush for the moment. Oh, and then at the moment, this side is dry enough for me to add that whatever this is that he's put in here in dark brown, whether it's a hill, a rock, I don't know what it is, but we're going to put it in anyway because it's there. And my orange is dry enough that I can do that. And for these sort of black, which aren't black pieces behind here, I'm going to use that brown that I've got. This one here, which has got quite a lot of rose mixed in it. I'm going to add in some Ultramarine Blue, which purples it up a bit, and a little bit of Phthalo Green, which greens it up a bit. Lovely and dark. And he has behind here, I don't know what this is again, whether it's a path or green shrubbery. That's why I added a bit of Phthalo Green, because it gives it a greenness back here. That's back here behind these trees. And the path is dark too. Now what I'm going to do, his path has kind of a brownish piece here. I'm going to put the light sort of orangey brown here first and grab that nice dark color. Start over at this end of the path. And over here, that tree trunk comes down a bit more. Comes over here. Just have that little bit of sort of orangey brown in the middle of the path there. That dark color we've just made, which is almost black, can be great to have this guy's bag hanging on his pole here. And for a few details, a little band on his hat, his neck behind the pole. There's some shapes on this end of the pole. We can outline his jacket a little bit. I got to go grab the original. I hate making stuff up. It's not, if you just get the original, I'm going to go to where all the little bits of black are. There's some shadows behind his jacket. And he's kind of got some shadow on his, under his jacket here on the pants to shape the legs. Just a little bit a little bit on his shoulder here. This gives you a little bit of definition for that little figure. And there's a funny little black dog. I think it's a dog. It has all the anatomy of a goat apart from the tail. So who knows? I don't know. It's got an upturned tail. Maybe the goats there have long tails like that. And then a sort of rectangular body. The back leg is going back, and there's a leg here, a couple of front legs, and then a neck that to me is like a goat, you know, longer, and then a sort of triangle for the head. Oh, I don't know. What do you think that is? The shape of it to me says goat, but there you go. I'll pull back a little bit. We've got some of the nice darks in now. Now all we need are the darker greens for the trees and the palm trees. I'm going to work on these trees first because my mountain's still a little bit wet. So the trees back here, a lot of phthalo green in these ones. They would have used emerald green. Adding a little bit more yellow, getting a little bit more bright, and then a little bit more yellow to get a little bit more bright in the foreground tree. And then there's some of the brighter green here, and then we can use a lot of the brighter green to finish off the palm trees and along here. So I'm going to mix up that darker green. I've got a green palette over here. So start with yellow. Got some yellow and some phthalo green. I'm going to use ultramarine blue this time because I want to go nice and dark with this green for the tree in the background. So phthalo green, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of yellow. And get that good and dark, a bit more blue. There we go. Now, as I move forward to the other trees, I'll just add more yellow to the mix. What brush do I want? Let's try my number 4. Okay, the top of this is still a bit wet, so I'm not going to do the top for the moment. I'm going to do the rest of this tree and come back to the top because my brown is a bit too wet. Use the point of my, you can use a 4 or a 2. I'm going to use the point of my brush to get in. The bigger brushes will get the paint on quicker, but you'll have trouble with the detail. You can always switch. You can always use a smaller brush for the detail and then switch to a bigger one. Oh. Don't worry if you're way behind me. I know I've got to get this finished for you, so. And for the video, for those people that want to watch the video, it needs to get done. So there, I've got the darker tree in. Now the one in front of that is only a little bit lighter, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to that, to my paint mix. I'm just going to work on them. They may blend wet in wet. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. If you have your mix the same amount of water for each one, you'll have very little blending. Like if it's equal amounts of water to paint in each one, they won't mix very much. I got my hand in the black there. Now, while I've got the medium green on my brush, I'm going to put in this part here over the light green tree that I did. Grab a bit more paint. Again, it's really nice because there's not a lot of detail, it's just a shape. So you don't have to fuss too much with the detail. We got that one in. Now, this one's going to be an even lighter green, so I'm just going to add more yellow to my mix that I have right there already. I'll start over on the left of it so that the tree on the right has a little bit of time to dry. Still got my number 4 brush. I could probably have moved up a bit, but this is working okay. And I'll do everything except go next to that paint, giving it an extra minute or two to dry, and then working up to it slowly and not worrying if I get a bit of wet in wet. So that's my same mix, just with a bit more yellow added each time to vary the color. And he has a bit of shadow on this tree, so I didn't mix the whole amount in. I still have some of the darker green there, and I'm going to dab that on the wet paint just to add a little bit of shadow to that tree. Using my yellowy green now, we're gonna get these darker green bushes in all along here. If you have some of that lighter green showing through, that's okay, because so did he. And that's why I put the lighter green on there. Should have done the dog last, but now I'm hurrying to get finished, so the dog got bunged on there before the green. If you did manage to get your dog done, goat, whatever, and he's still wet, don't paint your green yet. Let him dry. Yeah, his comes out kind of like this. Looking at it, I'm just checking his there. And I want to go to my number 2 brush because I want to get in with some of the smaller bushes. And I'll start with the lighter green. I grab my reference picture, sort of lighter green in here. And grab a bit more of the very light green, kind of very light green back here. Grab some of that really light yellowy green. And then it's quite dark. I'm just going to do some wet in wet darker green. Just there. And it's quite a dark green back here too, next to this tree. I'm adding a little bit of vertical sort of texture to this. He's got a bit of texture in here. And really all that's left to do now is the top of that tree. I think my brown is dry enough to get that in. And if you're working from the video, take your time to let paint dry or use your hairdryer. I'm just trying to get done in the amount of time that we have and not resort to a hairdryer for a 2-hour lesson. But if that helps you, then use it. And if you have extra time to work on it, then take the time to let it dry. I'm getting the medium green, which is the one that's sort of like this middle tree here. And I'm going to do the tops, the tops of the palm trees. Start over there. And I'm curving my strokes up and then bringing the fronds down a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit of dark brown on some of these too. I'm going to grab a little bit of dark brown. It looks like they possibly have coconuts on. And there's definitely some dark brown shape at the center. And there's a little bit of dark brown on one side of some of the trunks. He has been really, really loose with the palms. So I'm not fussing too much with them. Again, I'm going to get the dark brown and add a little bit of definition. Some of his have a bit of dark brown coming out to make the shapes too. Looking over at his original, there's a bit more dark brown on the trunks of his ones over here. And I'm going to add a little bit more blue. My green, as I put more and more yellow in it, was getting a bit more watered down. So I just added a little bit more blue to the green for over here where they're against the blue sky. I have to grab his one, I have it in front of me here. He doesn't have a lot of green on here. I'll probably add a bit more because I've got a bit of space there that I've left. It really doesn't matter what green you make these. He's got a whole variety. Some of his are more browny green, got quite a bit of the raw sienna colour. It doesn't matter. You put in what works with your colours. I'm doing mine a bit more green. His have got quite brown in these ones, so I've just grabbed a bit more brown. And the trunks have a bit of a brown definition. This one has a few little brown fronds hanging down. It has a little bit of a dark edge. And not too much detail. This one on his has a bit of a sort of a brown splodge here and here. And again, I'm just going to pull back. Wash my brushes. I know, I'm sorry, that was a bit of a marathon at the end there, but we're 15 minutes over. I gotta go pick up my daughter to take her to the ballet. So I'm just gonna pull my tape off to get a nice clean edge.
For today, Caroline, and enjoy the ballet.
Yeah, I will. I haven't been anywhere for a long time, so I'm hoping we'll have a lovely afternoon out. So there it is with a nice clean edge to the edge. And sorry if we were a bit rushed at the end there. I hope you can get finished up okay. And next week we're doing a Monet. We're doing Lady with the Parasol. So I think you'll really like next week's. And thank you for joining me. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed painting your Gauguin painting. I loved it because it was so colourful and so different from what I usually do. I'll see you next week when we do Monet. Take care. Thanks for joining me.